What is happening in J Gaming Dude here, and I thought I would make a tier list on Ratchet and Clank because I played a significant majority of the series. I think maybe like the mobile game is the only one I haven't played, and so I thought, you know what, I can definitively make a really good tier list of this, and so I figured why not? Better than me doing Need for Speed because I'm not too much of a Need for Speed fan, and plus I only did like a handful of games and not the entire series, which is absolutely massive. So I'll link the tier list in the description below, but we'll kind of just jump into it. So we're going to start off with Ratchet and Clank 1, which I'm going to give a solid A rank to, because it's the introduction to the series, but it's a solid introduction to both Ratchet and Clank as the characters of who they are, the characters that surround them, whether it be Quark, whether it be the big bad frog dude whose name I can't remember, and just sort of everyone in between. There's a massive variety of weapons, there's a huge variety of locations, the open-ended level structure is great. I feel like Insomniac did a really good job with Spyro, and they kind of brought their strengths over with Ratchet, but turned it from a cuddly dragon flying around all over the place to a Lombax and a tiny robot with massive guns. So for an introduction to the series, normally that would be like the middle ground in terms of, it's not bad, but it's because there's better later on, but it's not that great because there's better out there as well. So not bad but not good, but this one actually falls into the much better side of the series, which I'm actually kind of surprised now that I think about it. Yeah, and the villain's reasoning for why they just don't like Ratchet is kind of really funny, in a way of like just being jealous because everybody likes Ratchet and no one likes him. So it's interesting. Moving on from that, we have Ratchet 2. Now Ratchet 2 is interesting. I would say that that's also yeah, I'd put that as an A because it's really just more of the same. Again, the big bad doesn't really make too much sense because the big bad now is, one of the differences is now Quark with the proto pit and him trying to, take control of this giant monster. It's okay, is what I would say. It's not the greatest by any means. Actually, you know what? Yeah, it's just really more Ratchet and Clank. It's hard to talk about it any further because it's just more of what we like. Goofy villains, a massive variety of weapons, which this time are only ever so slightly different. A good variety of locales still, even if it's kind of similar, copy-pasty in a way. It just kind of keeps the good vibes going. Really, there isn't much more to say. Ratchet and Clank 2 is literally just more Ratchet and Clank 1, and the fact that the game came out immediately a year after kind of shows they must have, had some ideas of what they already wanted to do for a sequel. Either that or Insomniac had a lot of people in their team. Moving on, Ratchet and Clank 3. This one I'm going to put as an S rank. I feel like I enjoyed this a lot more because it was a much more challenging game than Ratchet and Clank 1 and 2. At the same time, they had more challenges, they had a larger variety of collectibles with bolts. Other than that, it is very similar to say Ratchet 1 and Ratchet 2, and instead of having to deal with Quark like we did in Ratchet 1 and 2, we get a new mainstay villain in the series in the form of Dr. Nefarious. So, and at least he has better motivations for wanting to take over destroy the universe and all of that stuff. So as goofy a villain as he might be, he still has a very good head on his shoulders, given what we've kind of had to work with and deal with up until now. Again, locales still are very fairly consistent in terms of variety, and also the fact that the weapons are just as all over the place and fun to play around with. The open-ended structure has only gotten better with Ratchet 3 in my opinion than Ratchet 1 and 2, but that's just me. So I definitely did enjoy Ratchet 3 a lot more. It does seem clear that Insomniac were learning and actually being able to put more stuff into Ratchet 3 than Ratchet 1 and 2, so it's good to kind of see that sort of evolve over time. Now, the next one we're going to do is Ratchet and Clank Size Matters. Now, wasn't this on PSP for some reason? I thought it was. This one I didn't play, so I'm not going to be ranking it anyways. So this is one of the rare ones, as well as Ratchet and Clank going mobile. So definitely just ignoring that. Secret Agent Clank was a solid B rank. I thought it was okay. A PSP game that is kind of like a side game to Ratchet and Clank, which features Clank. So it's kind of like what Daxter was to Jak and Daxter, essentially. A PSP title that was a fun time to play through. It definitely feels like a lesser title just because it was on the PSP, but I feel like that shouldn't give it any grounds for like being a less likely element of the entire franchise, especially since what Clank does best is sneak around. So being a secret agent kind of really worked for him. The stealth elements, the not getting into a ton of fights, actually there aren't a lot, but still, like, it's a fun time to be had. But there isn't really much to say about it because it's just more of the Clank stealth missions from like the mainline title so far. Specifically 2 and 3, I want to say. Yeah, those were the ones that had sort of more stealth locations, especially in 3 for Clank. So when Ratchet gets captured, Clank just has to go through a few ducks and then find himself in front of some sort of panel that ends up freeing Ratchet from being captured or something along those lines, which usually tends to happen. Moving on from that, so skipping Size Matters and going mobile, we kind of hit sort of like the next stage of not great. Would I call it not great? It's okay. The okay part. Ratchet Deadlocked. I'm giving this a D rank because I didn't actually find the whole idea of playing through arenas of fighting enemies over and over again to be fun. Yes, there's some sort of underlying story between the sort of samey fights in a Coliseum arena, and it's kind of like, okay, well, Ratchet is now stuck in a prison and the only way he can get out is through frenzied death battling, so he's going to be involved in frenzied death battling. It is the most difficult of the Ratchet and Clank games so far, but that's not to say that it's, not to say that difficulty is a bad thing necessarily. It's just, it's not good, man. I mean, yeah, this definitely wasn't a good Ratchet game in my opinion, but that's just me. If only they did more with it, because Clank isn't even with you, it's just Ratchet by himself for the most part. Also, the games, as short as the games are, I don't know why, Ratchet Deadlock felt a lot shorter for some reason. Next we have is Ratchet and Clank Tools of Destruction. So this was kind of like the move to, well, hold on, is that Tools of Destruction? I can't even read. There's 2 copies of Tools of Destruction here. Yeah, there's 2 Tools of Destruction here, both of them. One is the EU cover and one is the NA cover. I thought they were going to put Quest for Booty on here, but I guess they didn't. Anyway, that goes in the B rank because it's okay. Again, it's just more Ratchet, but at this point you might as well just kind of like wait, sit there and be like, okay, you know what? Maybe it's starting to become a little bit much and they need to add a bit more. The only thing that, these future games have going for them is that they look a lot better. Because now they're on the PS3. They play better, it does feel a bit smoother, but it's just more of the Ratchet and Clank that we know and love. Albeit that it feels like it's getting a little bit older with sort of time. But what then absolutely does shake up the formula is Ratchet and Clank A Crack in Time. Or as I like to call it, Ratchet and Clank My Crack in Time, but yeah, whatever. I'm putting that at an A because it actually, now it's using the fourth dimension is space. No, fourth dimension is space, fifth dimension is time, I think. using the power of the fifth dimension to pretty much, add more to the actual platforming, adding time as an element. Now, there isn't any time travel necessarily. Well, there is a little, I suppose. Not necessarily time travel, but rather the idea of like being able to like slow down platforms, be able to use sort of like, yeah, it's some really basic stuff, but at least it adds something to the board. So at the very least, like, it does make things a bit more different than what Tools of Destruction did, which was more Ratchet and Clank. Crack in Time was a slightly better game. Slightly, but enough for it to be an A, I'd say. Next we have All for One. All for One is an interesting title. I'd put that as an F. I did not like All for One. The whole sort of 4-player party mode in isometric view, it kind of defeats the purpose of like the platforming. The fact that you might as well be forced to play with other people, because playing by yourself isn't particularly fun. Yeah, it's an interesting concept to have Quark and Nefarious on the side of both Ratchet and Clank as a 4-player team, but that's all it's got going for it. It's not as fun to play. It can be incredibly frustrating at times as well, which doesn't really help matters, but yeah. It's not a great game. Earned the Platinum Trophy for that, and a significant majority of these games on the list, like Ratchet 1, 2, 3, Crack in Time, Deadlocked, and All for One. But yeah, All for One, just not a good game. Moving on from that, we have Full Frontal Assault, which I thought was I'd say it was okay. I had fun with the base building elements and putting up defenses and stuff. So pretty much turning Ratchet and Clank into a defense, like a tower defense game. It's not great, but it's different enough where the third person perspective is still there. It's not like All for One, the terrible isometric perspective. You can play with other people, but you don't have to. You can definitely do everything by yourself without any worry, which I think kind of defeats the purpose of multiplayer. The base building, the mechanics are pretty good, and there's a bit more of a competitive aspect to it between you and your opponents. There are online mechanics to it as well, but again, I don't really know if there's much more I can say about it that's good. It can be fun, but then its welcome is definitely worn out fairly quickly. And on top of that, what also doesn't really help is that for whatever reason, the game is very, very short. I would say out of all of these games, that would be the shortest to 100%. So yeah, it really doesn't have a lot of meat on the bones, which I think was treated more like a digital title than a box title. Fair enough. Moving on from that, we have Ratchet and Clank Nexus, and this is supposed to be part of the Ratchet and Clank Future Trilogy, which consisted of Tools of Destruction, Crack in Time, and Nexus. And Nexus is supposed to be a sort of a mainline story, despite the fact that they've released Deadlocked, Secret Agent Clank, All for One, and Full Frontal Assault. So this is supposed to be a proper Ratchet and Clank game. I'm gonna put this at a C rank because it's not. They could have done what a Crack in Time did and actually add something new, but they talk about a lot of things in the story, but they don't. It has no payoff. It's there, like the existence of other Lombaxes and things along those lines. So. Like we kind of tried to do with the Crack in Time, but they just didn't quite go through with, like, had they had a more solid story, I would have put this a bit higher, but they didn't do anything with, like, additional mechanics or anything like that. Yeah, they had, like, gravity boots and stuff like that, but I feel like that was not as situational as, like, being able to use time, which you could use just about anywhere in a Crack in Time. Yeah. I think the story lets it down the most, though, which is kind of unfortunate because I don't think most people generally play Ratchet for the story, but sometimes you kind of look back at it and you're like, it would have been fun. You know what I mean? Would have been fun. And then finally we have Ratchet and Clank 2016, I want to say. yeah, 2016. So this one, I'm gonna give a B rank. Okay, I'm struggling between a B and a C, so I'm gonna give it a B because it's pretty much a remake for the original Ratchet and Clank, except that it's a shorter game because they rushed through most of the story locations. It does look very pretty and plays really well, but it just feels rushed a little bit too much in certain areas. A lot of things don't make sense if that's how you're jumping into the series. The only people that it would make sense to when it comes to this game is anyone who has already played at least one or two Ratchet and Clank games in the past. Other than that, you're probably not going to be able to make much out of it. Yeah. You'd think it would be a good game for newcomers, but it really isn't. You're better off replaying the PS2 games on PS3, but yeah, that's probably like the easiest way to go about it. It's okay as far as it goes, I think. It's not great because it doesn't have the freshness of being able to play a Ratchet game for the first time, but it's not, and even if it was your first, I bet you would have had just as much a blast with it as anyone would have, anyone who started playing Ratchet and Clank the original did back on the PS2. So in that case, I don't blame you. It's just really a matter of perspective, especially when you've kind of played every game in the series. So it does kind of dampen your thoughts a little bit there. But yeah, that was my Ratchet and Clank tier list. Not much to really say here. It's pretty all over the place, but it definitely seems to have evened out in like a bell curve distribution in a way, if we completely ignore the fact that All for One exists. But yeah, that looks about, holy crap, that actually is exactly like a bell curve. But anyway, I'll see you guys next time.